You're listening to Lemmons Listening Library. Discover the story behind the stories with unique and raw conversations from the people who make your favorite books a reality. Welcome to this episode of Lemmons Listening Library. I'm Randi Lemmons, fantasy author, or RL Rose to those of you in the romance community. I am super excited about our guest today. She has so many different facets that we are excited to talk about. But before that, I want to always talk about my amazing partner in crime, Cathy. Cathy, will you tell our listeners about yourself?
Hey, y'all. I'm Cathy Ireland. I am an avid audiobook consumer. That's pretty much how I consume my books, is by audiobook. And I also do audiobook project management for authors, running the whole shebang for producing their audiobooks. So yeah, that's pretty exciting. That's about me.
And just a few show notes before we jump into the actual episode. We are doing this really cool thing where every month we are having indie authors put their covers of their books into a competition on our Threads account. And if you guys go check that out, put in the cover of your book, we will pick the top 10 and then let our followers choose their favorite one for us to advertise for the entire month on all of our platforms. So it's a super cool, fun way that we are trying to get indie authors out there. And we also do advertising for anyone who's interested. So if you go over to our Patreon account, you can check out the different tiers that we have there. And we like to just help people as much as we can. And that's a great way to support the show as well. So, all right, the moment you've all been waiting for, our amazing guest, KT. KT, will you introduce yourself to our listeners?
Yeah, absolutely. So my name is KT Wishert. I am a voice actor / narrator, a editor, and an author. So I do a lot of things in our little community here, and I'm really, really excited to talk about it. Haven't had very many opportunities to talk in depth with somebody about all of the little facets of what kind of goes on over here.
I imagine that you, like me, started in one of the facets and you're like, okay, I want to just make all the money that I need to make to support my life in the book world. And then it's like, okay, just authoring isn't doing it yet, or just narrating isn't doing it yet. So then you add the next thing and the next thing, and you're like, okay, I think it's trying to do it.
Yeah, absolutely. So, for me, for sure, one of the biggest things on the plate was authorship, but I'm sure any of our indies that are listening to us right now is that that takes a lot. There's a whole process. You're trying to get cover artist. Maybe you want character art. Maybe you need somebody to format for you. Or if you're going to format yourself now, you have to buy the format stuff like to put it through. And all of the things. There's so many things involved with trying to get yourself published. And because we're indie, we're doing it all ourselves, right? And so there was a bit of that where I wanted to make sure that I could finance that. I could get through that process because I have like 16 works in progress that are not going to be cheap to get all of them out there into the world. And then on top of that, with the voice acting and the narration, there's kind of that upfront kind of paywall that you have to deal with getting into it, with getting equipment, with soundproofing your space, and just really getting ready and set up to be in the narration and voice acting world. You got to shell out a little bit of cash first to kind of get something to work. Because of both of those things, I was already in the indie community as a beta reader and as an alpha reader, and I had already been working pretty heavily on making my beta reading comments much more in-depth from my previous experience in literary criticism and all of the stuff. And so I was really trying to get in-depth with my beta reading, and I had gotten a lot of really great feedback from authors that my beta comments were extremely, extremely helpful in trying to get through the next editing phase. And so from there, I kind of prepped myself a little bit more, and I spent another about year doing more in-depth analysis and studying and more beta reading for authors, and was like, okay, I'm going to jump into the editing kind of realm, and the editing will help me finance the other two as I kind of go through. So they all hold hands together as we move forward. But yeah, that's absolutely what happened, was kind of I needed to go into other avenues to kind of make the whole shebang work.
Yeah, and it's so funny because like we were like, okay, it's not like we can go sell cars, because if we go sell cars, we can't be like, oh, also we're an author, so you know you should go check us out. But if you're narrating and you're like, oh, but also I'm an author, they're like, oh, I want that. Obviously, I'm listening to your voice and I love your voice. So it kind of like also feeds into each other once you reach a certain tier, right? Once you get kind of everything placed together, all the systems in place, they do serve a purpose of like feeding into each other. Whereas if we're working, you know, in finance or working somewhere else, it's like it doesn't feed back into this dream that I have.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's a great part of being able to, you know, I'm in a community, and I might do a live event where I'm doing live cold reads for authors, and then the organizer of the event, like 2-3 weeks later, however it may be, then I get an email from another author that I don't really know, or I've met briefly before, and they'll be like, oh, the organizer of the event that you did like a month ago, 2 months ago, pointed me in your direction because you're also a editor and I need an editor. And so that's the great part about it, is that it kind of just, I get circulated around doing one thing, and then we'll pop up with somebody for a completely separate thing because it's all tied together.
That's the way to do it.
Well, how fantastic. Yeah, how fantastic is it to be like, okay, I have this one business card and it's going to fit all your needs. Here you go.
Right.
So would you say that like beta reading is kind of the beginning that like, hey, I could do this editing thing? Like if someone was in the beta reading area where they did that for other authors and they loved it, they have a lot of success, just like you, they got a lot of good feedback from their authors that they were reading for. Was that kind of like an awareness moment for you of like, I could make some money out of this?
Possibly, yeah. I think it's a possible stepping stone for anybody that's interested. I will say that it's coupled and partnered with, I do have background in literary analysis and criticism. When I was in high school, actually, I did competition in literary criticism where they would assign you, generally, it was a novel, and generally from the like great American novels kind of list. And then they would give you a play and a complete works. So like all of Shakespeare's sonnets. One year it was Robert Frost's complete works, something like that. They give you a set list of stuff, and then they give you what we jokingly called the Lit Crit Bible, which was a giant binder that's super thick, and it contains all of the history of like different literary terminology and concepts, as well as a whole history of everybody that's won like a Pulitzer, all of the stuff, all of the awards that you can get.
Way to suck all the fun out of reading.
Right? Yeah, right. And so we would get that and study that giant binder of information, and then we would go and take an exam that was like a combination of, if you ever did like accelerated reading tests in school, where you're being asked questions about the novel and the stuff that you read, but it was much more complex than any English exam that I had ever taken in a class. They got into the nitty gritty of literary analysis, and then at the end there was always a essay, generally about the poetry, where you had to break down the poetry and stuff like that. So I came from a background where I was already used to being able to break down advanced literary concepts. And then in college, I continued to take English courses, even though I did not go to college originally for English. I still took English courses in like Brit Lit and theater. and stuff like that. And so I did have a background that I could pair with my beta reading to take my beta reading to the next level. So I think it's absolutely a stepping stone for anybody that's interested in being an editor, but I do recommend that you get the kind of additional bricks, like we're building the staircase, right? You need to get the additional stepping stones to kind of get you to the capability of really being able to dissect down these really large manuscripts, because it's a lot of information to kind of digest, particularly in fantasy, where we're working with sometimes well over 100,000 words. So yeah, I would say yes, but find ways to continue to build your ability to work on these manuscripts, basically.
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah.
So
Sorry, go ahead.
no, go ahead.
I
No,
was
you're
just
go
gonna
ahead,
ask,
Cathy.
did you start out, so did you start as like an ARC reader and maybe a volunteer beta reader? Is
Mm-hmm.
that how and then you're like, wait, I'm actually pretty good at this. I could probably make money doing the beta reading. And then was that the progression that you did?
Yeah, essentially. So, oh wow, I think maybe about 3 years ago now. Yeah, we're going to go with 3. The timetable's a little bit loose there. But about 3 years ago, I started taking on beta reading. I think I did about 5 to 6 manuscripts at that point, and then I moved on and I continued to do beta reading. But at that point, I had finally, grown, developed a little bit of a system about how I did it, how I gave my feedback, how I formatted my feedback. And actually, naturally, my beta reading feedback kind of fell in line with what editors did, and I didn't know that. Editors at the end of developmental editing and such give you a editor's letter where they kind of break down everything in detail of what's working, what's not, etc. The whole analysis, essentially. And it can be, 15, 16, 20 pages on some manuscripts. It depends. But I had already been essentially formatting myself like that, but as a beta reader. And so then I started researching more about how editors, give all of their information back, and was like, oh, I'm already doing this. And so then after that, I started to continue to offer beta reading, still the voluntary free beta reading. But after the fact, basically I would leave them with all of the stuff that I had given them back and would wait a little while. And then I would come back maybe a week, 2 weeks later. They should have received all of their feedback from everybody at that point. And then send them an email kind of like, I am interested in offering editing services. However, I am new. I don't have a laundry list of like a repertoire that you can go check out. So I will do your developmental edits for completely free if you want to try this out. And so for the first, I think about 5 to 6 authors that I worked with, I did all of my developmental edits completely free. And that was my stepping stone of, I'm growing, you're growing, let's have grace with each other. And as long as you're open to it, let's do this. And most of the time they were very open to do that. And that's kind of how I started to get something under my belt.
I like that. That is so that's a great method of like building a business in general, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like you either give it for a free price or a very reduced price to get your reviews, to get your feedback of like, does the system work? Does it not work?
Mm-hmm.
So that's just a good marketing strategy or business strategy in general with that. But I also like, okay, if I was a beta reader and I like connected with a story, and then you could be like, oh, also, I can help you further this story. Whereas some of the stories, you enjoy reading them, but you're like, you don't connect with it that way.
Yeah.
And then you're just like, okay, well, you get to reserve the right to extend your services to the ones that you're just like, I want to see this book grow and flourish and be everything that I know it can be.
Absolutely. And that's something that you see editors do still, is that they'll offer the 1,000-word trial kind of thing. And I offer that for new clients. But it's not quite the same thing as being a beta. I do kind of miss that era of being a beta where I can be like, oh, but I'm like obsessed with this. And then extend my services, to just like very specific manuscripts. But I think there's a different side to it once you become an editor. You still develop a really in-depth kind of relationship with every manuscript that crosses your table, and in all very different ways. So one manuscript, I fall in love with like a character, just one character in particular, but the next manuscript that might cross my table, I'm more interested in, they had really, really great plot devices and they implemented them really, really well off the bat, to where I didn't really even have to do anything about your plot structure. Your plot structure is already flowing. Now let's look at scene pacing or something. And then the next person, it'll be a completely different thing. And so, yeah, I do miss the beta era where I could just kind of, I'm absolutely obsessed with your world and want to live in it forever. But there's still so many really great things that come out of the editing side, no matter what manuscript you kind of get your hands on.
Are you editing all different genres, or do you favor one genre over another, and do you charge differently? Like, I'm just fascinated. I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, you're good. So,
based on whatever.
I do work across multiple genres, but my rates stay the same. So my rates are per word, which is most editors that you find are going to be per word. Some of them do big sales, where they will just do a big block and it doesn't really matter how many words you have, but those are kind of few and far between. So my rates stay exactly the same no matter what genre I'm working in. I do have a much larger list under my belt specifically for dark fantasy. But let's see. This last month I worked on a contemporary romance. December I'm working on a space opera. And let's see. The fantasy that I've worked on have been pretty across the board in the subgenre areas. And I worked on a fantasy one not too long ago that was contemporary fantasy with no spice. But then the one before that was a really, really dark high fantasy with a lot of spice. So I'm definitely kind of across the board in what I offer. I don't typically do like historical fiction. I definitely lean more. I want fantasy. I want sci-fi. And if I'm doing anything contemporary, it's likely going to be a contemporary romance.
What was it in your life that got you started on books, right? Like, was it reading from an early age or school or just, let's start there.
Yeah. So I was an early reader. I was raised by just my dad, and my dad was a pretty busy man when I was much younger. And I started reading really, really young. I also got glasses very young because I was reading and they were like, your book is way too close to your face. So I started reading on my own about, 4 or 5 and just kept reading from there. I spent a lot of time at the library at my school, and I honestly would kind of play the AR system because every 6 weeks I had to read like a certain number of books of each type and all of that. And I never really vibed with any of that. I was like, I want to read what I want to read and you're not going to tell me. And then I would get yelled at. And so I would go back into the library and basically they would be like, you need 45 points this 6 weeks from a chapter book. And I would be like, okay. So I would go get a novel and the whole thing would be worth like 105 points and I only needed 45. And I'd be like, okay. And I would go and I would sit down and I would read that in a week and go and take the test. And I'd be like, am I done now? Are we good? Like, and then I would go back to reading like whatever. And so, yeah, I started reading at a really young age. And then in junior high, I started performance. I started, at that time, it was called oral reading. So, narration. You stand up at the front of a room with a piece that fits some type of, they always gave like a theme, essentially. And I would stand up at the front of the room and solo perform a piece. And I did that all through junior high and did decently well. And then once I got to high school, it was morphed from oral reading to prose and poetry interpretation. And they put, stricter guidelines and different things like that. All through this, I'm still reading, but there was something about the performance aspect, as well as once I got into one act play in theater, you spend a surprising amount of time not just doing the performance and running the performance and getting it perfect, but instead you're kind of studying where it came from, what's the history behind this play, particularly if they're really old and come from like Brit Lit. Then there's all of this background that came with the piece too. It's not just here's your lines, here's the attitude or the moodiness or whatever it is. We're spending a lot of time really getting to know the piece, where it came from, why the writer wrote it, to get the attitude, the mood, the setting, all of that right. And so they just kind of compounded on themselves. I already had a love for reading, and then I started to read more advanced stuff. And then I started to get into performance, and then I started to get into higher levels of performance where we were having to really dissect what we were doing, and on and on and on. And so it built over time to get me to where I am now.
So like you kept going into the back facet of something, like, okay, now I have to figure out how this is made, or I have to figure out how this is put together. And you just kind of, your understanding of the literature world is so multifaceted that I feel like when you were like, oh, I could write a book because I know how to, without, you know what I mean? Like, everything when it comes to what makes a good book, all of the pieces that you have to put into a book, right? The beginning, the end, the climax, all of that.
Mm-hmm.
So whenever you were like, oh, I want to write a book, was it daunting for you, or was it like, I can do this?
A little bit of both, actually. So I had been coming up with ideas for a while, but I was in college, and at the time I was going to Texas A&M for engineering. I was doing something completely outside, nothing to do with literature at the time. But my best friends and my roommates always loved when we would sit and talk about story ideas, or I'm also a big movie watcher, TV show, anime, all of that stuff. And so we would be watching something together, and then I'm breaking down the whole thing.
Your mind can't help it at this point.
No. And the good thing is that my roommates, my best friends, they are just as neurodivergent as I was. And so we're sitting there and I'm breaking it down because I can't help it at this point. And they're interested. They're asking me questions. They are involved in this process. And after living together for a while, they were really like, you need to go do this. Go do this. This is what you spent a lot of time on. Go and try to turn it into something. And I had really subscribed to the idea, because of my upbringing and everything, that if you weren't doing something hard, you weren't doing something worthwhile. If you weren't doing something like becoming a doctor or becoming a lawyer or being an engineer or doing these quote unquote list any hard thing and making buckets of money, you are not important. And that had been kind of a general message growing up, I think, to my whole generation. You need to go to college and do something important, basically. And
even if you hate it.
Yeah, even if you hate it.
Yeah.
And as long as you're making buckets of money, then in your free time, you can spend your buckets of money doing the things you actually want to do.
Right.
And I was like, but I was bought in. I was bought into the whole premise. And I was very lucky. My fiance at that time, my husband now, has a very solid job, has a very good job. And we followed his career opportunity. And I washed my hands of it. I dropped out of college in my 5th and final year. I still only have, it's like 7 or 8 classes, and I would be an engineer right now. And I dove kind of head first, and it's still daunting. It's still daunting every single day because I still have the thing in the back of my mind telling me I'm not doing something important. I'm not doing something that's making me buckets of money. I'm not doing XYZ, XYZ, XYZ. So that part is still really daunting because a part of me feels like I'm not a successful person because I don't fulfill society's standards of what success looks like. So that part is daunting. But when I really sit down and try to work on my books, on my projects, that is never daunting. I can always see the picture. I always see where I'm going. I always see what needs to be tweaked, implemented. Okay, this isn't working. Let's reshift to a different structure here. Okay, this character isn't working. Let's pull him out for now and set him over to the side. Maybe rework it and throw it in a minute. But yeah, all of the things, I see it so clearly. It's more getting over the internal stuff that has been put in the way to try to blockade the creative space, you know?
Was there like one book that just really snagged you and you were like, fuck, this is it. Like, this is.
Wow. I have had that happen through multiple phases in my life, and it's been very different books each time. I would say, so I took a short break from reading when I was in high school and didn't read for a year or two. I don't remember how long. But my dad actually gave me a book recommendation, and I was like, that's crazy. We're living in an alternate universe right now. And he was like, this book is really good. I think you'll love it. And this was after I had read The Hunger Games in like early junior high, around 6th grade. The movies hadn't even been announced yet.
Right.
I had read it way before the fact. You know, list all of the YA stuff. I read all of that in 6th, 7th grade. And so I'm coming off of this really long hiatus. My dad is read this. And it was The Long Walk by Stephen King. But at that time, it was Richard Bachman, his pen name. It wasn't Stephen King. And I was like, okay. And that book, I don't really like a lot of other Stephen King stuff. I'll put that out there. But that book got me out of a decently long hiatus on reading. One of the few books that I can list to this day that made me sob multiple times. I get emotional when reading, but not very many pieces have brought me to like the ugly crying. And that one did. And yeah, so I'd say that one in high school. When I was in college, I took another hiatus and didn't pick up reading again until I just randomly one day picked up some stuff by Laura Thalassa. Now, Laura started as a indie. She self-published her first stuff like a decade ago. I couldn't tell you the year. But she started as an indie, and that kind of drew me to it. And then I picked it up and I loved the whole series. Sorry. I loved the whole series, and it really got me back into not just reading, but got me much more invested in the indie community, because again, the little barriers that my brain and society have kind of established was, well, traditionally published. You have to be traditionally published if you're going to be successful as an author. That's the only way that anybody finds success.
Yeah.
And to see Laura, who had done it as an indie and then now is picked up by a publisher after the fact, that to me was just screaming, like, look how much talent we have in the indie community. That
actually a very large community, the indie community is.
Yeah.
It's getting so big too.
It's so big. And, you know, trad is never going to be able to keep up with it. And I still see authors that come across my desk that have enormous talent, and we get across to that finish line and they go on and then they publish that manuscript and they do really well. And it's like, you don't need trad. But, you know, back then, years ago, for me, my brain was like, it's trad or nothing. You're not, that's the only way that you find success. So then to see somebody who started as indie and then was picked up because of the success that they had before even being in the traditional realm, that invested me back into, okay, let's see what we can do. Let's see what the whole community can do. And so there's definitely been some books that I take a short rest and I stop reading for a while, and then I pick something up and it just drags me back in.
That's awesome.
I love that. No, you mentioned how like we have this space now for indie authors, and it's so funny because while we have this space, it also has, going as an indie author, you have to take on so many different roles. You have to do your marketing, you have to do all of this different stuff that falls on you. And I keep hearing like, you know, we should be thankful that we have the opportunity to be indie authors, but also like the shaming part of like, why are you upset that you have all this on your shoulders? You chose this route. You chose to go indie. There is an appropriate space to have both of those feelings.
Yeah.
We can be thankful that we have this opportunity, and we can be stressed that it is all of this on our shoulders because we chose to go indie instead of traditional.
Yeah.
That's like telling a mother that you have to feel, you know, you can't complain and have stress because you chose to have 3 kids, or, you know, you have 3 kids, whether it was by choice or accident or whatever, versus, you know, people.
Yeah.
Get the fuck out of here.
For sure. I think, particularly now that I've been hardcore working with indies for over a year now, it is a huge process. It's a huge process, and it is okay for it to be overwhelming some days. And, you know, I offer my editing, but part of that also comes in, I have authors that are on my clientele list. I haven't looked at their manuscript in a month, a couple of months, something like that. But they'll send me a message, and I'm like, you know, I can look at what you're talking about. I can pull it up. Just send me the up-to-date document and I can look at it. And they're like, I don't want to be a bother, or I don't want to XYZ. And I'm like, you're okay. I want to be involved if you want me involved, because the only way that we have more of us crossing the finish line is if more of us stand with each other. It's not that's what trad publishing ends up having over it sometimes, is that as a author, whenever you get a trad publishing contract, you have a whole slew of people doing crap for you. And in the indie world, we're trying so hard as an individual to take it all onto ourselves. And I'm trying to, as much as possible without burning myself out, bridge that gap of, you don't have to do this entire thing completely by yourself. If there's something that is bothering you about the manuscript, is something that you just can't think yourself through, you're in a block right now, whatever it may be, like, talk to me. We can talk about it. And sometimes I don't even have to say anything. You just saying stuff out loud makes it, fixes whatever you're working on. And so, I think it is completely reasonable to have those moments where it's really overwhelming because there's a whole lot going on when it comes to being indie. But luckily, I do think a significant portion of the community does stand on the fact of we're in this together. And I know I certainly try to as much as possible without getting really overwhelmed myself.
So you just sparked something for me, and I'm going to compare this to D&D, and I hope everyone gets it. So when you go on an adventure in D&D, you typically need a paladin. You need someone who's going to heal everybody. You need someone who's going to be the front runner that's going to be, they can take the brunt of the attack, the tank. Mm-hmm. You need, the wizard for long range. You need a collection of people to go on these adventures.
With different talents.
In the indie, yes. The big and short of it. In the indie community, wouldn't it be so cool if we could start putting together little groups like that where we have everyone wants to write. Our goal is everyone's going to be published. But Sarah's really good at marketing. Mm-hmm. Jen's really good at book cover design. KT's really good at editing. And you get this like little group together and you all just work together on doing stuff for everyone, and everyone's things get marketed really well, everyone's things get edited really well, everyone has fantastic book covers, and then you've got this little adventuring crew and your audiobook producer. You have a Cathy for an audiobook producer.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's something that I would be interested in being involved in. I have seen a significant portion in the last couple of years of indie publishing houses popping up where that's essentially what they're trying to offer. And they have kind of a list for each type of thing that you might be needing of people that they recommend. And then they kind of push you along through the process as they go through their list. So I've definitely seen something similar already going on. I'm not on anybody's docket. But
you're not on any adventuring teams yet.
No, I don't believe so. Also, I'm a cleric main, so
Yep.
I particularly warrior priestess, where I get to use, if I use my main action as a melee, I get an additional main melee action. So not only am I healing everybody, but I'm gonna be a tanky little cleric up in the front lines. Like,
why are you not picked up on a team yet? That is like the best person to have on your team.
We need to start our own team.
I agree. I love that, and that's what I'm thinking too. Like, I love the idea of what they're trying to do with the self-publishing book houses, mm-hmm. or the indie book houses publishing. Gosh, words fail me. But like, I'm thinking if we could put something together that has this team that does it, like our core people, the price for it is going to be the services that the other people. It's like what trade work, right? Yeah. Like, and it would all have to be, balanced out and make sure, because book covers are kind of a one and done thing. So then, I don't know. I definitely feel like there's a way that could totally work.
Absolutely. And if you guys figure out any of that, I would love to be involved. I've been asked before with all of the things that I do if I was going to try to open up a publishing house. And I was like, that's an undertaking. I really just want to stick to doing the editing, doing the narration, and doing my writing. And I didn't want to take on all of the administrative stuff that would come on with
There's additional roles that aren't passionate to you.
Yeah.
I think so that's an interesting concept, Randi, now that you're talking about that, because there are, yes, I could do the audiobook project management, but you also have to have it's a business. So you have mm-hmm. to have, the back office, the invoicing, the money, the collecting money and all that stuff. So there's something here.
Yeah. Now it could just not work out, in theory and on paper, but it's a fun idea.
It is a fun idea.
One of the best parts about being in the indie area, though, and I understand that I am extremely lucky to be in this boat, but I in my career have had a bit of the free range to do as I please kind of thing. And I'm extremely lucky to be able to do that. And I wasn't like that for a very, very long time. When I was in college for engineering, I was going to school for engineering full time and working full time to pay all of my bills, to pay for school, to pay for all of the things. And I'm extremely lucky that my husband now has a job that covers everything. And he's like, you go do you, have fun. And I barricade myself in here and I do my thing. And so it's one of those, like, one of those endeavors would be something that I could absolutely afford to do, because if it tanked, it wouldn't destroy me. But if it takes off, it takes off, you know? And at the same time, I also understand how in the indie community, not everybody has those cards to play, you know? That's not always feasible, because I was in that boat a year ago. Yeah. And could not do that.
I think it would have to make enough sense of like, okay, so if your job in the group was to do book cover designs, and the person you're doing the book cover design for, they're editing your book, right? The cross back and forth, you're going to spend that money on someone editing anyways.
Yeah.
So the time that you're putting into making their book, you're going to have to compare like the cost value of your time. Does it even out? Does it add up? Like, does it make sense to do this trade work to where it kind of just evens out?
Yeah.
So, just things to consider. If I could get a group to where everyone is like, okay, it all evens out to where no one has to pay anything, but we're producing like crazy and we have this good team that is just marketed high quality stuff. Yes, please.
For sure.
Sign me up.
For sure. I've got 16 100%. Works in progress that would highly benefit.
Same. I've got a trilogy and then a 4-book series. So yeah, I'm right there with you. I've got too many in the pipes to do all the other stuff. That's awesome. Wow. That completely derailed my brain to the point where I'm like, okay, hang on, focus back on this thing.
You're good. I do have a question about
Good. Go for it.
So you've gotten in right now, you've taken us through the beta reading, you've taken us through the editing. So narrating, have you narrated books? Are you like, do you have projects? Like, take us into that realm.
Yeah. So, again, I started in junior high-ish with performance, and then I did multiple types of performance all the way through high school and into college. And then when I was in college, I met a handful of voice actors for English dubbed anime. And we were at a really small con. It was on our campus. And so I got to really actually hold conversation with these voice actors, not just the hi and bye that happens at the really big conventions. And I had told them a bit about what I was wanting to do. And the best hype team in the world. I'll say that. Right. And so I pulled the trigger and went and got a bunch, my recording equipment. And then it took me a while, only until about 6 to 8 months ago, to get a really decent booth. Before that, I had been mostly in a closet with a weird TP situation going on. Now I have a decent booth, and I have 3 projects next year. And what I've been doing this year has been mostly snippets for authors for social media, as well as I do a lot of live events, and my little theater kid heart loves the live events. So if you ever hear of
the audience aspect of it.
Yeah. So if you ever hear of live events, and just let me know. I will be there, because there's something.
We know of one.
Okay, good. There's something so I think some of my best performances are when they basically are like, hey, can you do this? And I'm like, oh yeah. And they're when you got 5 minutes. Okay, hold on. And I just rapidly have to read through whatever they just handed me, and I'm doing essentially a cold read on Alive. And those always, for some reason, come out way better than every bit of time that I spend in a booth where I can do it as many times as necessary. I can't explain it. And I blame it on the years of theater. I'm used to, it's all the way through from beginning to end of the play, and there are no retakes. You're in front of a crowd and you're doing it right now. So being pulled back into that kind of arena really pulls it out of me. But yes, I've been doing mostly snippets and live performances this year and have booked for next year. So you'll see my first audiobooks coming out next year. The only one that I can officially talk about is An Ember of Darkness by Faith Sloan. I'm playing Soren, who is a non-binary shifter dragonet. And so in some of the scenes I will be male and some of the scenes I will be female. And they play a kind of minor role in this first book, but talking with the author, it looks like we'll have significantly more down the road through this series. And so super excited about that. The other two I can't quite explain too much yet. We'll wait for the authors to make their big announcements.
That's awesome. Congratulations.
Oh, thank you.
We do know of an event.
Yeah, no, that's... Oh, go ahead.
No, I was just saying we do know of a live event. We're aware of one.
Yes, we do.
Oh, perfect.
Somebody is doing something for the Human Voices Only thing that's happening, and it's a 24-hour event that we're gonna have narrators read snippets from authors, indie authors.
I would love to do the I love 24-hour events. I just did Human Voices Only, like the posting on Friday, and did about 7 snippets throughout that day, and I love the 24-hour events. Those get me excited.
We'll see how much we love it after we do it.
Right? This might be the one and only one we do.
I totally understand. I know some of the
coffee.
Yes, lots of coffee. I know some of the other ones that I've been in. I've seen it be a little bit of a struggle, but they spread them out. They don't do too many of them. It's kind of a 1 to 2 a year situation. They're not doing a whole bunch of them. And I'm like, I understand, because I was scheduled for a couple of different reads. And so I hopped into the 24 hours about 3 different times and read one and then had about a 6-hour break and then came back for another and had like a 3-hour break and had to come back for another. And that was tiring, let alone being there the entire time.
Well, I've got an application I'm going to send you.
Absolutely.
And you'll be our first narrator to send it to. So
awesome. We
haven't announced the date or anything, and we haven't even officially announced it yet. So you're one of our first people we've talked to about it. That's awesome. I did have a question for you, kind of going back to the pressure that you put on yourself and the expectations of the outside world and everything like that. How do you work through it? What are some things that you work through for, one, telling yourself that what you're doing is still valuable? And because people generally need a purpose. We generally need something that makes us feel like there's a reason why we're here.
Yeah.
And if you are tearing that down because you allow the outside belief systems to just beat the hell out of you, how do you combat that?
So what really helped me, and it took years, was I was in college, and like I said, my degree was not in anything literary or performance, but I did take the time to take a couple of classes that were just for me. And it was my junior year. I took a class called The History of Theater Around the World. And in that class, something that holds true and what we kind of find out, basically once every society that we know about, once they moved from the nomadic to being in one place, right? They established shelter, they established constant food, and they established water and your basics. But what's funny is that with every society that we know about, after they get the basics, after they get shelter and food and water, the very next thing that every single one of them come up with is a form of entertainment. And most of the time, it was storytelling. And so we see it start, maybe even within the nomadic tribes before they settled down. But it's kind of like the hunter's tale. You have your husband, he goes out fishing, and then every year in Christmas he tells them about the giant fish that he caught, and it was this big.
It gets bigger every year.
Yeah, that started forever ago. Yeah, that started forever ago. But that's the thing, is that if we look at all of these societies, theater and storytelling have been a building block in all of them forever. And we look at the cave drawings and cave paintings, and then we look at rituals and celebrations from cultures across the world, all of the things. And that kind of solidified in my mind when I was struggling the most with the decision of, do I still want to be here? Do I still want this engineering degree? Or do I want to go do the big impossible thing? I want to go do a career in this creative field. Taking that class and seeing exactly how ingrained storytelling has been in our whole history was clarifying a bit, and that the creative arts, as much as society really likes to push them down and hold them down, we crave them for a reason. There's a reason that when I was growing up, almost every other weekend, or as often as possible, my dad and I went to the movie theater. There's a reason that we do these things. And there's a reason that we spend our money on video games and movies and D&D and all of the things. Anything you can come up with in terms of free time and entertainment generally has something to do with storytelling, or just generally the creative arts. Yeah. And we can continue to try to push that down as a society, or we can just recognize right now that the people that can do the creative arts well are providing something to society. It's pretty simple. And I have to sometimes remind myself of that, because it's not easy. I very much was ingrained and grew up with, if you go into the creative arts, you're just going to be the starving artist. You'll never amount to anything. You'll try to get on Broadway your entire life and you'll never make it, and you'll just be poor in New York City. Name any movie that has that trope in it. But that was heavily ingrained in me, and it's still kind of there. And there's some days that I'm getting really overwhelmed with the work and everything that's involved in it, and it can be really easy to start listening to that again.
Yeah, I think that's important. I think the voice doesn't ever go away, right? Like, I think it's always there, because like you said, society does try to push the storytelling down. If you are inspirational and you are influential, but you're not telling the right narrative, shh, be quiet. No one wants to. You can't do that.
Yeah.
And so it's so hard. Like, if you're storytelling the right narrative, if you're storytelling the thing that's in right now, you're flourished, you're pushed up, you are skyrocketed, but you also have to have the right face. You also have to have the right attitude. You also can't have the certain opinions that, you can't be very loose with your opinions. You have to be on this one path. And if it strays in anywhere else, you lose that spot.
Absolutely.
And that's such a 1%er position.
Yeah. And I think another thing that I've definitely experienced over time, being out of college, being out of the engineering kind of realm, I'll run into people and, bar talk and stuff like that, where you're meeting people and it's like, what do you do, et cetera, et cetera. And my favorite that always seems to be just this crazy kind of bombshell that people can't put two and two and make it make sense is I'll explain that I'm an editor for indie authors and narrator XYZ, and kind of go into a little bit about it. And then we'll keep talking, and the fact that I was in school for engineering comes up, and that I was studying material science engineering, specializing in metallurgy. The metallurgy part is usually what comes up. I'll be talking like in depth about something about that, and they're like, I thought you were a writer. And they never say author, they never say any of this. It's writer. I thought you were a writer. And I'm like, yes, I'm a writer. And I understand that going from an engineering background to a creative field background is a little odd. Like that is different. But it's more the tone and the way that the conversation flows after that is, I didn't realize you were intelligent. And I'm like, oh wow. Yeah.
You know, I think that's so interesting because in reality, like a lot of authors have swung out of their, previous career. I know several. I know one
Corporate career.
Yeah. She was like an engineer for freaking Toyota and flying all over the place. Like,
Yeah.
And now she's a quite successful indie author. And, it's so funny how people, it's like, no.
It's like, yeah.
Yeah.
Wow. And I just, the responses always kind of crack me up because it's the underlying tone. They don't straight up say like, wow, I didn't realize you were intelligent. It's the way that they say everything else that comes out of their mouth that you can tell that that's what they kind of mean and are thinking.
Yeah.
And
what sucks though is they're being fed a narrative too, right? Like so many times other people's voices is what comes out of our mouth.
Yeah.
Like unless we train ourselves to have that awareness, they just spewed their mom's crap out on you just then.
Yeah. Yeah. It was whatever they grew up, hearing or whatever they think about when they see today's media. Yeah, absolutely.
Because they don't get to, they're not brave enough to step into that, to leave their corporate job, to have their parents judge them for, you're a starving author, that's what you're going to do? Yeah, that's what I'm doing.
That's what I'm doing. Yeah.
I think that too, that they judge you as a person by their opinions and their own judgments of the type of book that you're writing.
Yeah. Yeah.
Excuse me.
And I'm very lucky to say, as much as when I was younger, I never really felt like my dad in particular was trying to drive me down a certain road. And so it was more society as a whole that gave me the notion of I have to go do this thing. And so then whenever I left engineering, at first he kind of expressed concerns. But the last time that I went home almost a year ago, he was like, no, I'm really excited for what you're doing. And so I do have that level of support from family too. Like I've managed to land in kind of like this little golden area that I know not a lot of our colleagues get to be in. But I did land in this kind of golden area where I do have a spouse who wants to see this be successful too. I do have my immediate family that wants to see it be successful. And so I really try to use that as a strength to keep going forward because I know so many in our community that do not have that story, And that's also why I feel like it's really important within our community to try to bridge that gap of if you don't have to do this whole process alone, if there's something that you need assistance with, opinions, answer questions, whatever it may be, like use your community, use me, or if I can't answer it, I'm sure I know somebody who can. And I will try to find them.
Bravo to Dad, right?
Yeah.
Because guess where that generational curse ended? It stopped with him, and he didn't put that onto you.
Yeah.
And so bravo to Dad, because guess what you went out and found? You found a partner who was embodying the same thing of Dad, who's like, do what makes you happy. And him, allowing you to do that, that just means that your community has broken the thing that you feel the pressure of.
Absolutely.
That's awesome.
It is amazing.
That's what we all strive for.
Yeah.
It is. It is.
You okay, Cathy?
Yeah, I thought I was going to hack up a lung and die right there.
Went down the wrong pipe.
It did. I was like, oh my God. Okay. Sorry about that.
You're
You're good.
good. So I love that you also mentioned that you had your friends in high school and stuff, who or in college, I'm sorry, who you guys kind of analyzed movies and things together.
Yeah.
I want to bring up the fact that you kind of seem to have these people gravitate into your life that are very supportive, that are very like, okay, you have this thing that you're hyper focused on and you're very good at like the detail oriented side, and they're not like, okay, you're overloading me with stuff, right? They're joining into you with the conversations. They're excited as you
Yeah.
are. And that's huge. I think that that says something very deep about who you are as a person, because one, attracting the things that you put into the world is very real. If you put into the world that awesome positivity, you're going to attract it back. And I think that that goes into your stories and how deep you get into them, and just the passion of like your work and stuff like that, working with other people. Oh, hey, don't worry about bothering me. You know, let's look into your story. Let's dive into it. Because I think you also, and I might have this wrong,
Mhm.
but I think you also understand boundaries. Like
Yeah.
you understand that I will give as much to you as I have, but then there's a hard stop. And that makes people so much happier and able to do stuff for other people when they have that boundary line within themselves.
And it's really hard, and it's taken a bit of time to find where those boundaries lie, right? Because there was a running joke when I was much, much younger. So when I was in high school, I did basically everything that my high school had to offer. I was involved in everything except sports by the end of it. I had left sports, but I was, I was a band kid. I was on the drum line during marching season. During concert season, I played clarinet. I did theater. I was in the art and anime club. I was in everything. And so the running joke with my family was there was a picture somebody had drawn. It was a meme that was a guy and his friend. And the friend is like, "Whoa, dude, I think you need to chill out and just stop and smell the flowers." And the guy grabs the bundle of flowers that his friend is holding up and like snorts them up his nose. And then the friend is horrified, and then the next frame is the guy standing on the pedestal number one, holding up the number one trophy that says number one flower sniffer. and,
Just became a competition with that.
yeah, and that was the joke amongst me and like my dad and my immediate family was that I did everything and I never did anything half-assed, and that kind of led through to a burnout situation, though, particularly in college when I was working full time and going to school full time. And so college is where I had to kind of figure out where my boundaries lie. Go, wait, I can't do all of this. I'm in my early 20s and I'm exhausted and I hurt all over and all of the things. You know, I had aged myself a decade in a year. And so I started to kind of figure out my boundaries there. And then when I started doing the beta reading and then ramping my way up to now being a full time editor, there was a lot of having to figure out where boundaries lie, along with like policy. Like you're running a business, so you try to figure out where your policy is. But then outside of the policy, just establishing generalized boundaries of this is how much communication I can handle in a day, or personally when I book authors for different editing types, because I do developmental / content as well as line, how much time do I set aside for those things? And I add in buffer because I have a tendency to try to run myself ragged. And so sometimes I will have a day where I wake up and I'm just, nothing is happening today. Nothing's happening today. And so I'll
Are you able
book
to do
an
that?
author.
Like, do you find, is it hard for you to completely not do something?
So that's the fun part, is that I'm very neurodivergent. And so some days it's not my choice. And so some days I wake up and my brain is like No. You're going to stare at the ceiling, and that's all I'm going to let you do. But the hard part is that my brain never shuts off. So even if I'm not actively working on a task, my brain will think about it for hours. Even if I'm trying to take a minute to chill and relax and do something that's not revolving around that, and just watch a movie with my husband or play a video game with our friends, or we have D&D every other weekend. And I'm just trying to,
So jealous.
I'm just trying to do something, that's not work. And, half the time I'm still thinking about it. And so I do struggle with my neurodivergence. I'm very ADHD. And so sometimes that comes with the task avoidance as well, is that sometimes starting with a new client is the really hard part. Continuing with a client is easy, but starting with a new client, sometimes my task avoidance.
It's messing up your schedule. It's something you're not scheduled in, and then you don't know the. Oh my gosh, I'm right there with you on that.
Or getting or getting the email, like you're doing work, and then you get an email from a new client or a client that you worked with a few months ago, and they're asking a question, and then you start doing the emails, and now my brain's shut down and I can't continue what I had been doing earlier in the day. I've given all of my functioning power to the out of blue email and answering that and formulating that and making sure that's all cohesive and makes sense and clear, and sending that down the way to whoever emailed me, and now I can't function.
Yep.
And so
because that was unexpected.
I think that corporate America has driven us to this point of, like that's a requirement in a job, is multitasking, when essentially people are not able to multitask. You cannot physically do that. You literally can pretty much only do one thing at a time. You can you cannot type 2 emails at a time. You cannot type in text. I mean, you can literally only do one thing at a time.
Yeah.
And so I feel like that, like and we've bought into it. We've allowed it. We're like, oh, I'm such a good multitasker. That's such horseshit. Nobody is.
And that's the thing too, is that I'll have quote unquote really good days, or like really high functioning days, right? And I'll be doing a bunch of things all at once, right? But technically, I'm only doing one thing at a time, but my brain is juggling the timeline of about 6 or 7 different tasks. So, go put this load of laundry in. While the load of laundry is running, then I'm going to come in here and I'm going to edit this amount. And then once that load of laundry finishes, I'm going to throw it in the dryer. Now that the thing is not running water, now I'm going to go do the dishes. And my brain juggles like this perfect, beautiful little timeline. Well, guess what? On those days that I have that really crazy high functioning, and then I burn myself out. And then the next several days, I can't do anything. And so there's this idea of like, well, yeah, you can multitask. And it's like, okay, I multitask and I have one really amazing productive day, but now my brain is fried. And I know that happens to neurotypical people too. It's not just me. You have one day.
It's almost like you pull the energy from the future to get everything done in that day.
That's exactly what's happening. And I know people that are not neurodivergent, that are very neurotypical, that express the same thing, where they have one really knockout crazy day, and then now they're exhausted for the next
every day.
Yeah.
Every day.
Yeah.
You get phone calls, you get emails, like probably 100 emails a day, and phone calls, and then people walking by your desk, and then your supervisor needs something, and God forbid did you get up and go to the bathroom, and it is exhausting to try to get that done, and probably most of the time, like at the end of the day, I'm closing out 15 different fucking emails that haven't done. I have probably 10 different spreadsheets open. I'm not joking on this. Like, this is exactly how every single one of my days go in the corporate world. And, like 10 different spreadsheets. And I'm like, do I need that? I don't know. No, got it. I don't need it.
My favorite is when you're going through, you've had like a really long day and you're going through your whole computer and you're closing out like, I don't need this. I need that. I don't need this. And when you get to those like handful of tabs where you don't remember opening those and you're just like, what the fuck is this?
Yeah.
Like, when did I do this?
That's when I go.
I was
to
searching
turn it
how-
off and turn everything off. I don't care if I lose everything. Fuck it, I'm done.
Oh yeah, no, the surprise ones always get me. I'm like, when was I searching how to make bread? I don't even have a bread making machine. I don't even know, like, what the hell?
You eat bread.
My favorite is the as an editor, I do fact checking for my authors. So I'll like clarify things, and I'll be reading something, and I'm like, you could be right, but I think that's wrong. And then I go and I like go through a whole rabbit hole of fact checking, and I'll end up in like a whole history dive for something. And then I finish with that project with that author, right? And at the end of my tabs will just stack up for a month. And I won't close any of them because I'm all using them at the same time on this author's thing. And I'm like, I don't want to lose anything. We're just going to leave it all there. And at the end of the month, I'll finish that project with the author and I'll close out all of my tabs. And I'm like, when the hell did I end up on this? Like, what is this?
Your internet search history could be quite...
I feel like I've got authors beat because I do have an interesting search history for my own authorship, but the fact checking for other authors, I think, has absolutely pulled out some of the weirdest stuff that I've ended in a deep dive with.
You're like, it's not even for me, officer, I swear, it's for someone else. I was fact checking how to murder someone for someone else, I promise.
It's even worse when I tell them that I got paid for it too.
And I really had to like look
funny.
and see what this kind of stuff costs, like to, you know, rope and the shovel and whatever. Ace Hardware.
I love the topic of burnout because for you to understand how big your tank is, you do have to run it on empty. Yeah. You do have to get to that point to like, I can't function anymore. Otherwise, you don't know how big your tank is.
Yeah.
And over time, sometimes your tank gets bigger. Sometimes your tank gets smaller. But generally, it does get bigger, right? Like, we can handle more stuff. We have new systems in place. We now know that outlining a book sometimes actually is way more helpful than just pantsing it. Yeah. So that does expand your tank a little bit.
Yeah.
There's just a bunch of different things, but you have to hit that E.
And that's the hard part. And something that I had to have, you know, a really in-depth conversation with multiple people about was that, you know, I was this high-achieving, high-functioning kid. And then I went to college and I was doing full-time engineering and full-time work. And about a year in, I hit burnout. And then for about 3 years, I ran on nothing. And I got a lot of comments from like family and people of the, like, I'm still getting all of the, you're so successful and we're so proud of you. And so there's that kind of like bolstering thing of I'm doing the right thing. I'm doing the right thing. And you're just like desperately trying to hold on, but you're burnt the hell out. And I was struggling. I was struggling and nobody could really see it. Everybody was just we're so proud of you and we can't wait for your graduation and like all of these things. And I'm like, I'm probably not going to make it there. Like trying to keep myself together. And so then when I dropped out, it was like I had been running on empty for so long that when I finally dropped out and got rid of all of my requirements, like the school requirements, and I moved away from my college town back to my hometown. So I left my full-time job. And when I did both of those at basically the same exact time, my tank went and kind of filled up a little bit. And then, you know what I did? I went and got 2 jobs and was working full-time during the day and then working full-time at night at the bar. And so I immediately was just like, I have energy, burned myself out again. And then I was getting comments from my family of, you just don't seem like yourself. Like, this isn't you. You're like all of the things. And I was like, no, this is what I've been experiencing for the last 3.5 years. You just haven't seen it. And so I burned myself out again immediately. And then my husband and I moved up here for his job. And I quit both of those jobs and wasn't working. I was doing this. I was doing the editing / narration / authorship, but I was, few and far between in between clients. My clients were more spread out at that time. I was only getting about 2-ish clients a year. And so, I didn't really have work, and my tank immediately just flattened and was like, you have nothing. I give you nothing. And for a while at the beginning of being here, several months, 6 to 8 months, I was hardly functioning. It was like I fed myself, I fed my husband, I'm done. And that's what happens when you burn yourself out and then live in burnout for a really long time.
And so, you eroded your tank.
Yeah. There was
you were pulling from outside energy that you didn't have. Like, I can just picture it, like, right, here's your funnel to fill it up, and it's just like sucking all the energy from the outside, and your tank just like crinkled into itself and just eroded.
Gone.
Yep.
And so this last 1.5 years has been building the tank back up.
So how are you doing that? Like, what are the steps that you're taking to do that?
So a big part of it was stop pretending that my brain works like everybody else's. And so once I, accepted and realized the fact that my brain does not work like everybody else, that my brain has 1,000 tabs open all the time, all day, and that costs a lot of energy, and that it's harder for me to keep one thing straight, and all of the things and all of the trains are interconnected and weaving around each other. And I just have a lot going on internally all the time, and other people don't always have that. Once I started to understand that, then I could start kind of implementing ways to make things work easier for me. And so actually allowing myself concessions and doing it this way so that it's easier for me to get it done, even though neurotypical people don't have to do it that way, doesn't make it less of a valid way to do that thing, and so starting to do the concessions on getting things done so that I could, do household chores, personal hygiene, anything that was like giving me a particular struggle. And then from there, my clientele picked up rapidly. I went from having one client in, hold on. In 2023, I had to think of what year we were in. I had one client in 2023, and in this year, I had about 6 like full clients and a handful of other clients that we were doing like smaller tasks. We weren't doing a whole big editing round where I was scheduling them for developmental and line. It was more like we were just doing kind of more of an advanced beta read because the draft wasn't ready, whatever it may be. And so I went from having one person to having about like 9 to 10 people that I was juggling. Oh, and I was also doing all of these live events. I had never been in all of these lives and interviews or anything like that. And so after I'd kind of learned to make the concessions in my day-to-day to get through the cleaning and the living part, then it came into the job aspect where my job was starting to pick up. And that's where figuring out the boundaries of how much could I handle you emailing me in a day? Or what authors I offer up my Discord to, because Discord's a faster way to get to me. But sometimes if we're just doing like a little job, I just ask that you email me. But if I have an author that, we worked on the first book and they're like, I kind of want to do the entire series with you, then I give them my Discord because they're probably going to be asking me more questions in between the official editing sessions kind of thing. So figuring out boundaries as well as figuring out time slots for scheduling things. So a developmental edit, I schedule an author for an entire month. Now, Do I spend the entire month, every single day, quote, 9 to 5 editing? No. I schedule the author for an entire month for developmental / content because, 3 days out of the week, I might get 6 to 8 hours of work done. But then there's another day in the week where I couldn't get up and do anything, and I was grateful that I fed myself. And then there was another day that, I got an hour-ish done, and then my brain got sidetracked, and I started doing this and this and this and this, and I just ADHD'd across my house. And so, I schedule now with the intention of building in purposeful buffers. So that
Yes, that's what I was waiting to say the whole time, was the buffers, the allowance to give yourself. I love that. I love that you have that for yourself.
Yeah, and it's still kind of a work in progress. Still kind of working out the finer details of if I have an author come in that's wanting to do 150,000 word manuscript, it's like, okay, never mind. We're going to do like 6 weeks. Okay. So that I have those buffers in there. But my authors that generally sit between 40 to 80, that 1 month is good. We're good there. And so kind of getting all of the finer details in there. But it's taken a lot to allow myself, because my brain absolutely still wants to be like, no, we can function like a completely normal person. And I'm like, well, we did that for years, and you see how that.
I think we just need to kill that normal word, right? I think that there is no such thing. Everyone else is just better at it, coping with what they've got going on.
Yeah.
They're better at hiding what they've got going on. Like, I think everyone's neurodivergent to some degree, whether it's sensory, whether it's ADHD, whether it's autism, whether it's a dyslexia who likes to mess up the way that I say words. I think that it's just coming to acceptance of like the way that society has been doing things has caused a lot of depressed and broken people. So it's not working. So it's okay for all of us to just, like you're doing, redo everything. Let's figure out what works. Let's find the buffers that serve us. Let's do the things. Let's make the schedule and schedule in buffer days. And then whenever we actually need that day on another day, we just flip-flop the fucking schedules, because that's fine too.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. And so that's been mostly what this year has looked like, is figuring that out, because I had never allowed for it before.
Yeah. So go ahead, Cathy.
I was going to ask about KT, the author, so I was going to go there, but
oh my gosh, we haven't even got into that.
I know. So I'm trying to bring us back to the schedule a little bit.
You have someone like Cathy who controls your ADHD brain, because we'd be here for 3 hours otherwise.
Absolutely.
So let's talk about KT, the author. And so what do you have? You said that you have like 16 different projects going, but let's focus. Let's not get. We don't need to talk about all of them. We can a couple of them. We can if you want, but what has your focus right now, and what are we looking at?
Yeah, so the one that's kind of picking up in the last year that I've done the most focusing on is called The Hallowed Air. The goal is for it to release next year, but it might be a 2026 release. We're going to see. But essentially, I've been selling it as John Wick meets a Warlock D&D campaign.
What was the name?
The Hallowed Air.
I don't even read that stuff, but I'm sold. You got me at John Wick. And then and
that was a big part of it, was that, so I love fantasy. And so fantasy is going to be a big part of it. But I also grew up with my dad, and we watched a lot of action movies. I love John Wick. And I love a lot of the really fast-paced. Yeah, I love a lot of the really fast-paced, action-y stuff. And so I wanted that to be a part of at least one of my manuscripts. I think it works its way into a couple of others, but this one, that's like a big premise for it, is a little bit of the action fast-pacedness coming in. And it's contemporary fantasy as well. That's how the John Wickness kind of works in as well. So it's set in our world, but we've got all of the fantasyness coming in with the warlock aspect. And so it's dark. It plays with some advanced themes. A big part of it is absolutely moral ambiguity. Where's the line? And
We like our guys morally gray.
so the main character does not start morally gray. The main character comes from a really dark background, leaves it, is very, very like lawful good, very, very like I'm angel child kind of thing. And
Paladin 100%.
yeah, and is all on that, and then shit hits the fan, and now she's involved in a whole lot more, and now it's kind of a okay, well, where do you draw the line? Where do you feel it is? And it's a lot of fun because the main male character is the one that's kind of like, well, where do you draw the line?
Is it here, or is it here, or is it here, or do we just erase it?
Yeah. And so I have my little synopsis written. It's Sawyer is a second child to a member of the Hallowed, a crime syndicate composed of families all pacted to demons. Only the firstborns are destined to inherit the family pact. But 10 years after Sawyer left the syndicate behind, her family is found dead, including her older brother. With a new pact to a very harsh demon and the question of what happened to her family, Sawyer is forced back into the fray. And so, yeah, we play a lot with moral ambiguity. We play.
So I do want to touch on, so for people who don't know, D&D type things, warlocks have a patron that they have the pacts with.
Yeah.
They have the agreement that they get their power from agreements on you are tied to this demon in your case, or sometimes it's gods in other cases.
Yes. And so the whole thing is the crime syndicate, the Hallowed, is just a group of families where the head of their family has a generational blood pact with a demon. And so there's a whole contract that's involved, and you'll find out through this course of the book like what the rules are, because Sawyer kind of runs into issues with the rules over time. But yeah, and so because the fun part is that it's a generational blood pact, and so that's where we really get into the issue with Sawyer, is that Sawyer doesn't want anything to do with this. But generations ago, the deal that was struck makes it to where she can't get out of it. Now she has this pact, and she was destined to inherit it from the very beginning. And so there's a lot of the moral ambiguity of, well, she, one, was raised in a crime syndicate. Two, she left all of that behind at great personal cost, and then now is essentially forced back in because she inherits the pact. But also her whole family died and she doesn't know why. And so we have to go handle all of that. But she might not be willing to do all of it that it takes to handle all of that. And so,
when does this come out? This is already out, right? This is something I can go purchase right now.
I want it to be out next year. Currently still heavily playing with, is it going to be a standalone or is it going to be a duology? The thought when I originally started plotting was a duology. And I'll preface that I am a plotter / pantser. So I get my overarching...
Explain that to the people, because I have no idea what y'all are talking about. I'm like, okay,
pants. Not a problem. Yeah, so
someone's got some pants issues. What?
Discussion about this anyway?
Yeah, absolutely. So plotters, if you are a straight up plotter as a writer author, you're planning everything to the detail before you sit down and write your first draft of your manuscript. You want to know every single thing about every single part and every single character. That's a hard.
I do either scenes or events. Like I'll have like, okay, I have 12 events that I want to happen throughout my story, and then I'll have little details of like how that event happens within each one.
Yeah, and so that's like you come over here to the hardcore plotter, and they have character maps and like all of this information before they jump into the manuscript. Pantsers fly by the seat of their pants. They have no idea. We're gonna start writing and see where that goes. I lie in the middle of I plot where I get my major points. I'm like, this scene, this scene, this scene, and this scene. And I'm like, okay, those are definitely major scenes that I want. And then, you know, my major character will kind of have a background fleshed out in my mind, as well as like maybe the next major character, but a lot of the side characters are not fully thought out. They just kind of appear. And so I'm in this middle ground where I kind of have a little bit of it figured out. And then I'm like, the rest will come to me, and I start writing the manuscript is essentially what I do. And so I got a pretty decent plot line out and was thinking, okay, this is probably going to be a duology based on the highs and lows that I have, you know, in the plot points and the plot structure. And then I started writing and then made adjustments to my plot points, which I typically do. That's not abnormal. And then was like, ooh, I can't decide if I want to make this just a hefty standalone or two slightly smaller and do a duology. And so I'm kind of sitting on that peak right now of I could go either way at the moment. Either way, I would really like the first one, whether it's the only one or the first of two, to come out in 2025. But that's also coming down to I juggle a lot and I have a lot of clients. And so my personal writing kind of takes a little bit of a back burner to all of that. And so we'll see. We'll see.
But you have built in a somewhat of a client base already.
Mm-hmm.
So like your people that you edit for, they know that you've got this thing going on. You know, the people that you connect with generally know that you also have this author side.
Yeah.
So it's super smart, like we talked about in the beginning, tying this all back together and making this full circle of like, you generally have this group of people that are going to buy your book immediately.
Yeah, and it's kind of funny. I haven't put too much out on social media. If you go onto my page, you'll see like 2, maybe 3 posts about the Hallowed Air. I do talk about it a little bit more in lives. So I do have kind of an established base of people who are wanting it. I just have to get there. Particularly because in this last year, I developed such a large clientele, and I'm also booking my audiobooks now, finally. And so, you know, the beginning of 2025 is essentially already almost completely booked out. It's authors coming back for their line edits, and we've already done their dev edits, or we completed a book earlier in this year, and now we're doing a whole new book. In that series. And so, yeah, there's a whole kind of bunch of stuff going on at the very, very beginning of 25 as well. And I'm still trying to go over here. I'm still trying to finish the main draft and then send it along to my betas. And I don't even have a comprehensive list of betas. So, you know,
Same.
the progress is a little slow moving right at this moment, but I still think a goal for the like maybe a year from now, November 2025, is solid still.
So 2 things that come to mind with that. One, there's definitely something to be said about having standalones, because I know that a lot of readers will not start a series if they know that there's going to be more than one book. So there's definitely something to be said about having standalones for sure. And 2, so do you edit your own books, or do you have someone that you would do? Like, how does that work? Because wouldn't you? I don't know. I'm just asking.
Yeah. So I don't edit my own books. I do, but I don't. So I'll finish my first draft, And at the end of my first drafts, what I usually do is, as an editor, I have checklists, and that's for line edits and for developmental content edits. I have checklists, and they're very simplified because every manuscript is also really in depth. And so I kind of get to do my own editing while I'm actively plotting it out. So when I'm plotting before I even do the manuscript, I'm able to avoid a handful of problems that some authors sometimes run into while they're writing their first manuscript. I'm able to kind of jump over that hurdle immediately and knock it out of the way. And then once I have the manuscript finished, that first draft, then I can kind of go through, then I'm checking pacing. I have all of the little stuff that are just little ticks, like yes, looks good. And
You got your system in place.
yeah, and so what I'm looking at doing, I've already been in the market and shopping for my editor, but the hard part is that I'm looking for editors. No, I'm not really searching for me. I'm actually searching for somebody. There's a lot of editors in the indie space that are somewhere around my skill level, or, lower and much more affordable. But I'm looking for somebody. I want somebody that's going to tear me to shreds. And with that, a lot of the editors out there that are going to have the capability of doing that for me have been around the block, and they've got a whole lot more years under their belt. And then therefore, whereas like one manuscript might cost $700 from me, my manuscript for them costs $5,000. And so there's kind of a difference, which understandable. I've got about 2 years under my belt. A lot of the editors that I'm looking at have closer to 20 to 30 years under their belt. And so that's what I'm looking for. I'm being very careful as I quote shop around. And I recommend that our indie authors listening shop around, because it's not always just about the price point. I understand price point is really, really important in the indie community, but it's also, are you going to vibe with this person, and are they really going to give you the feedback that you need and are looking for?
Yeah.
And so that's what I'm doing. I'm shopping around, and the price point is a little bit higher than I would really, really like to pay. I can make it work with some strings and some good budgeting. I can make it work. But those are going to be the people that are going to be able to give me the feedback that I'm looking for, kind of thing. So I do have to hire other people and bring other people into the process. And I do recommend anybody in the indie realm, bring people into your process. And if you cannot do the whole editing shebang and pay for an editor, I mean, I've posted videos about what the processes kind of look like, but there's the alphas, the betas, stuff like that. There's definitely other things that you can do to still get other eyes, because
that's so important.
Yeah, a big thing, and something that I see personally as an editor, but something that I see in my own work when I'm really involved in writing on my own stuff, your brain stops picking up the things. And so you look at it so much that your brain no longer sees what's wrong. And It's like staring at the color red long enough that it turns green. And you just believe that it's green now, and you cannot convince your brain otherwise. And then you bring somebody else in, and they're like, that is red. That's red. And
I love that analogy.
Yeah. And so I highly recommend, even if you don't do the whole editor shebang, because I know everybody's budget is going to be completely different when going through this process, get other eyes, get other people to look at it, because you will look at
and unbiased eyes too, like not family, friends. Like, you got to get someone who doesn't have a tie to make you happy, because sorry, but dad reading your manuscript isn't going to hurt your feelings, and he's going to tell you it's fantastic.
Yep. And I even personally really, really try to keep my numbers affordable, and I'm working on trying to set up even payment plans and stuff like that to make it affordable. Because I still have to pay bills, but I also understand where everybody in the community is kind of at, because I'm there too. I don't have an endless amount of money to spend on this process. So I'm like, let's try to make this work, because I understand the value of having another pair of eyes, unbiased eyes, really look at it and go, this is what's working, this is what's not. Here's a couple of suggestions of how to adjust and tweak and XYZ, and all of the things. So, yeah.
So if someone was wanting to find your social media platforms, connect with you, I imagine is there a one place you can kind of get everything, or do you have to look for different pen names or different situations?
So if anybody's looking for stuff from me, everything all the time is going to be on TikTok. But there's going to be, at the very beginning of 2025, some major announcements and adjustments. So KT Wishert will continue to be a editor, author, narrator, but KT Wishert is specifically going to be any of my adult content. So if you're containing spice, if it's really dark, all of the fun stuff like that. If we're 18 plus, we're going to fall onto KT. I've been developing a pen name as well as a brand name, and all of it goes together. And I guess I can give you a little bit of information on it. All of it's going to interconnect. So KT Wishert is my actual name. I go by my full first name, but KT Wishert is my real name. And so my company, when it comes out in 2025, will be The Wishing Well. And my pen name that I'm going to release for basically anything that falls under 18. So my YA works, children's, stuff like that. I don't really do children's books, but I'll do young readers. So we're talking like Percy Jackson, kind of that area. So my young readers and my YA is going to be under playing with the first name, but the last name is going to be Wells. So Wishert and Wells with The Wishing Well. And so there's going to be a whole lot more updates of like a website officially dropping, and then Wells is going to get their own social media pages, but I'm not going to really be hiding any of this information. I'm not going to be hiding my pseudonym, none of that. And so all of this information and where you can find me and all of the new social medias will be on KT Wishert's TikTok. And you'll see all of that.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Are you going to branch into the other socials, into Instagram and Facebook and stuff?
I'm on Instagram right now. I do not really post on it. To be fair, I hardly post on TikTok. The reason that I'm on TikTok most of the time is 9 times out of 10, I'm in a live. So if you get on TikTok, I'm probably in somebody's live somewhere. And that's how I use it for the most part. I like to talk to people. And so I already kind of hardly post on TikTok as it is. I'm working on, once we finish up the branding and everything for Wishing Well and for the pseudonym and all of that, that we're developing a kind of a media system. So more posts to TikTok, but also now my Instagram that has basically nothing on it is going to be posted to pretty regularly. And I'm looking at a couple of other possible social platforms. Not certain on anything yet, but that will be announced when
do Threads.
Blue Sky, I've heard, is also
Blue Sky was one of the ones that I've been playing with. So yeah.
Yeah, we started a Threads account 2 weeks ago, and we're already over like 1,200 followers.
Amazing.
On it. So I'm loving Threads.
Okay, I'll try Threads out. That sounds good.
Awesome. Well, KT, you were fantastic. These conversations, I feel like we literally talked to 3 different people, because I don't know how you manage all of that.
Yeah, it's a lot.
But it's awesome. And I understand through the neurodivergent side and the ADHD side of like, these are your passions and they're all three separate people, but they're all still you.
Yeah.
Or not three separate people, three separate things,
Yeah.
but they're all still you. So great conversation. Good stuff.
Just wait until somebody gets me going about the engineering, and then it's a whole fourth person comes out, and then there's the band kid that'll talk about music for 17 hours. Like, yeah, it's hectic over here.
You know, we're allowed to have different facets to our personality. Yeah. It's totally okay.
Yeah.
As long as you don't become separate personalities that are not interchanged with each other, and then you don't know the other person's personalities.
Takes hardcore control. I don't know which one would win that battle. I don't.
Pretty funny.
There can be only one.
The one ring that rules them all.
Alrighty, guys. Well, thank you so much for listening to this episode of L3. It was so awesome, and we can't wait to hear what you think about it, and we'll see you on the next one. Hey guys, thanks for joining us on this episode of Lemmons Listening Library. Remember, every story has a journey, and every journey deserves to be heard. Keep reading, keep writing, and keep listening.